Great to have you. My name is Shaun Lahiri. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics, and I'm helping out temporarily while we have our new managing director, Dr. Cornelia Walther, join later this month. So as usual, we got another great lineup for you today. I just want to quickly tell you what the agenda is going to look like. So we're going to have a little brief introduction from me, a few announcements, and then we will feature a video from our early career researcher series, where we showcase somebody who's at an early career stage doing some kind of interesting research on behavior. Then we will have our main talk from 1:15 onwards to 2 p.m. by Dr. Eliana La Ferrara from Harvard Kennedy School. And finally, we'll have a Q&A after that, moderated by one of our faculty members here, Dr. Eugen Demand. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started with the business. So first of all, if you don't know, we're the Penn Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics. So what we do is consulting, research, training. We are specialized in understanding and designing behavior change work and training people around that. So that's who we are. We have this NOBEC Talk series, and we have some great speakers coming up as well, all the way until December 2023. So quite a nice schedule there. So do have a look and attend the ones you can attend. We also have a few ground rules, nothing too complicated. Just be muted if you're not already. Keep your camera on if you can. We would prefer to keep it real interactive so we can see your faces. And then in the chat, feel free to ask questions, raise your hand. I'll also be putting a few links in the chat related to our talks today. And then finally, note that we are recording this. And let me go ahead and check on my end that it is being recorded. It should be. Let's quickly stop the screen. Check it is. Yeah. Okay. Good. Always good to double check, I say. So back to business. Our recordings will be on the website later. So if you have any colleagues that missed this talk, you want to share it with them, it will be available for later. So next, we have an announcement. I'm going to toss it over to Dr. Eugen Demand to explain this announcement.
Yes, hi, everybody. Yeah, just real quick. Many of you might be familiar with the recent debates on nudging and whether nudges are effective as we think. There was this PNAS paper that came out last year, and a lot of follow-up research that came out after this. So what we tried to do at the center in collaboration with some colleagues in Europe is we are going to target a subset of the nudging literature and try to evaluate norm nudges and understand sort of from a meta-analytical perspective the effectiveness of norm nudging. And at this stage, we just invite you to be part of that if you have any research that you've done in this topic, and or if you're just interested on that in that topic as well. Shaun might just drop the link in the chat that includes a little survey. And all of your comments would be appreciated because it will allow us to narrow down what this meta-analytical approach to norm nudging should look like. And so we want the community to be part of that before we pursue this research. So there will be an email coming around in the next couple of days as well. But in the meantime, the link that you will receive in the chat, Shaun, maybe you can drop the link real quick. That link will allow you to participate in that short survey. Yes, that's all that I have on this.
All right, perfect. So do have a look at that link in the chat. I would like to move on next to our early career researcher. So we have a fantastic presentation that's been recorded by, let me see if my slides will advance, by Sophia Pink. So Sophia Pink is a PhD candidate at the Wharton School here at the University of Pennsylvania, and she has recorded a wonderful presentation for us today on correcting inaccurate meta-perceptions and how that reduces American support for partisan violence. Unfortunately, Sophia is on a plane right now going to a conference, so she could not be here in person, but I will be sharing some links to her profile and some of her work in the chat. So do have a look at those links when I share them. And without further ado, let me go ahead and play the video that she has recorded for us. If there's any issues with the audio you can't hear, go ahead and interrupt me, let me know, but it should work. So without further ado, Sophia Pink's presentation.
No sound on my end, Sean. I think you need to check the mark, the thing that you want to share sound.
All right, give me 1 second, everybody. You'd think after all this time on Zoom, I would know these things, but alas, getting older and not wiser. Let's try now. Can you hear now?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Pink, and I'm a doctoral student at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And today I'm going to share with you a paper entitled Correcting Inaccurate Meta-Perceptions Reduces American Support for Partisan Violence. And I worked on this with my incredible co-authors, Joe Murnick, Jamie Druckman, and Rob Willer. So people today are really concerned about political conflict and political animosity in the US, whether the US is headed in the right direction, whether we split in two, whether the other party is a threat. And one aspect of this that my co-authors and I were really interested in is support for partisan violence. So you might say, why are you just looking at support? Why are you not looking at, actual acts of violence? And we think support is really important because it measures norms around nonviolence. So if more people are even a little bit supportive of partisan violence, it allows others to get away with violence without being sanctioned, without being punished. Now, most research so far on the causes of partisan violence have focused on really important aspects like trait aggression and strength of partisan identity. But the thing is, these are really hard to change. So we wanted to look to see whether there was a cause that might be a little bit more malleable. So we looked to research on meta-perceptions. So a meta-perception is a perception of a perception. In this case, it's what people think members of the other party think. And there's a lot of great research that shows that people grossly overestimate the extent to which members of the rival political party dehumanize their group, feel prejudice towards them, support undemocratic norms, and that these meta-perceptions are often causally related to people's own partisan animosity. So in this project, we want to look to see first whether Republicans and Democrats in the US have accurate meta-perceptions about rival partisan support for violence, and whether correcting these meta-perceptions might reduce partisans' own support for violence. So the first studies we ran, we just wanted to measure, do people have accurate perceptions about the extent to which rival party members support the use of partisan violence? So what we did is we ran a survey, actually 2 surveys, with representative samples of partisans. We asked all participants first a set of questions measuring, like this one, measuring how much do you feel it is justified for members of your own party to use violence to advance their political goals these days. And then we also asked them the same questions, but we asked them to guess how do you think the average member of the other party responded to this same question. So overall, both Democrats and Republican support for violence was on average above 0, but still low. So, about 9 or 10 on a 100-point scale. But when we asked people to guess the other party's support for violence, people were completely off. They overestimated by a factor of 3 on average. And we saw this when we ran the study again in a slightly different sample at a different time. Okay, so we know that people are completely off about the extent to which the other party supports violence. Next, we wanted to study whether correcting these misperceptions might reduce individuals' own support for violence. So what do? What we did is we ran an experiment where we first asked all participants to answer those same meta-perception items. So essentially to guess, how much do you think the average member of the other party supports violence? And then we randomized them into 2 conditions. So those in the control condition saw something like this, where they were shown the questions and then they were shown their guesses, no additional information. But the other half of participants, those in the correction condition, saw their guesses, but then they also saw the correct responses, which in most cases were much lower than their guesses. Then we asked them, how much do you support violence? What we found is that the correction condition decreased individuals' own support for violence by about 34%. And when we did the study again in a slightly different sample, which is the figure on the right, we found this effect replicates. And we also find some evidence that it's actually durable. So it lasted for about a month when we recontacted participants after the experiment. So what does this mean for the study of conflict and animosity? Well, perceptions of political conflict might be able to actually exacerbate conflict itself. And so there's a potential for a vicious cycle to start with increasing support for violence based on a perception that's completely inaccurate to start with. But the good news is that this can be corrected, this can be interrupted. So thank you so much for your time, and feel free to email me.
All right, that was Sophia Pink, everybody. I will be putting links to her work in the chat as we continue with the talk. But for now, let us proceed with our main speaker. So let me go ahead and offer some introduction for Eliana, and then let her take it away. So give me 1 second to get the slide up. All right. All right, so our main speaker for today, Dr. Eliana La Ferrara from Harvard Kennedy School. So just wanted to say that Dr. Eliana is a professor of public policy at Harvard Kennedy School. She's actually the second vice president of the Econometric Society and program director of development economics for the Center for Economic Policy Research. Also a JPAL affiliate, a foreign honorary member of the American Economic Association, and an international honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Science. A lot of accomplishments. Her research focuses on development economics, political economics, particularly on the role of social factors in economic development. I could go on, but I would prefer to let her speak for herself. So Eliana, why don't you go ahead and take it away? Feel free to share your screen, and let's hear what the talk is going to be.
Thank you very much. It's really a privilege to be invited to this group. I follow the research from far, but it's great to now take part in an active event of the group. And let me try to see if this will work. Are you seeing my slides?
Looks great.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So what I want to do and it's a paper on actually trying to get rid of different contexts. So given the, I'm sorry, I'm getting this yeah.
Sorry,
You are breaking off a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
Could you repeat the last thing you said?
I think she was asking whether she cuts in and out. So the answer is yes.
Okay. I'm sure she's going to be rejoining shortly.
Yeah, there you go. She's back.
All right.
Sorry, I must have hit a wrong key. Can you now hear me and still see my screen?
Yes, we can see you, not your screen.
Not my screen. Apologies. I think I was trying to get rid of them.
All right,
Okay.
we can see the screen.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for that. So given the audience, I'll spend very little time motivating the talk and try to go straight to the two experiments that I want to discuss today. So as I said, this is going to be about female genital cutting, which is the practice of cutting or removing part of the female genitalia for non-medical reasons. It's a practice that's performed on girls between infancy and age 15, most on house setting, and it affects a very large number of women worldwide. It has very serious health consequences both at the time of cutting and later in life. And here you see a map with the prevalence of FGC according to the most recent data. And you see how, there are countries like Somalia, where one of the experiments will take place, where the prevalence is actually 98%, and other countries like Sierra Leone, where the other experiment will take place, where it's still around 90%, and large parts of the continent where we are in the range of 70% and above. Now, as researchers, we tend to ask two types of questions when we confront a practice like this. One is, why does it persist, given its apparent absence of benefits, and then which policies can we put in place, if any, to eradicate it? And the main theories on this for the existence of FGC can be grouped in four headlines. One is that this practice acts as a signal of purity, chastity, fidelity from the wife. So when it gives some benefit on the marriage market. Another one is that it's a marker, or it's a part of one's identity, be it religious or cultural. So independent of any material benefits, people follow it because it defines who they are. And then there are explanations which build more on a social interdependence. One is that people basically misperceive the extent of support for the practice in their reference group. So this is a pluralistic ignorance explanation. According to this, even if people are individually not in support, they could still continue practicing it simply because they fail to recognize that others like them don't support the practice. The second of these social explanation is that maybe the beliefs are actually correct, but there is a coordination failure. So nobody wants to be the first one to abandon the norm. Okay, so if you think about how to embed this in a very stylized economic or rational decision making model, you can think of a model with a large population where people can choose between two actions, cutting and not cutting. And you can denote with PI the proportion of individuals who choose one of the two actions at a given point in time. And then the utility from this action will have three components. The first is this identity payoff, I sub I. Then there's a payoff, which is an intrinsic utility that we might relate to any material benefits, if there are, for example, marriage markets benefits or other benefits the individual might derive from the action. And then there's this term, which is where the social interdependence comes in. So here, what this term says is that my utility is decreased the higher the fraction of individuals who choose action J different from my own. So if I choose I, and there's a fraction PJ who's choosing the other action, then my utility goes down. How much does it go down? It goes down by this parameter SJI, where this S basically measures what is the penalty that the agents who play action J exert on those who play action I. So thinking about this very style, and I've done some work, some theoretical model that I'll refer to later, where we start from a formulation like this and try to study norms transition. But today, I just want to focus on the more experimental work, where we took each of these components and tried to see, how could it be changed, if it could be changed to lead to a decreased support for the fraction. So we left out the marriage market intervention because when we surveyed people both in Sierra Leone and in Somalia, it never came up as one of the reasons that they were reporting for following the practice. Most of the reasons were about, cultural identity or religious considerations and, potential social sanctions. So the experiments I'll show you basically are going to play on how can we change these terms related to the benefit. In particular, we're going to use an information campaign to make people more aware of the health costs of FGC. And this can be interpreted as a change in the term AI in the previous model. Then we're going to try also and play with the identity payoff in a way that actually comes from work done on the ground by an organization that has taken not a top-down approach to trying to get rid of the practice, but say, look, there's a reason people follow this initiation ritual. Let's not try to take it away altogether. Let's propose an alternative that will preserve all the richness of the cultural identity component, but just remove the cutting ceremony. So one intervention will basically try to get communities on board with this alternative practice. Then we have an experiment where we try to deal with the pluralistic ignorance hypothesis and basically elicit and reveal beliefs on support for female genital cutting. And finally, we try to deal with the coordination explanation by looking at a lab in the field equivalent of what NGOs have done for many years, which are these public declarations where they would get a number of families on board to promise that they don't cut their daughters or that they don't marry their sons to cut women. And so we'll have a very simple lab in the field exercise that tries to mimic this type of experiment. And I want to say that the first two that you will see, which relate to work that we did in Sierra Leone, actually benefited from a lot of help from one of the people on this seminar, and a UPenn PhD student, Ornella Darova. So Ornella was in the field when we launched the project, and she was really key in getting this off the ground and helping us with the baseline and everything. So Ornella, today you're going to see how this shaped up in terms of impact. Okay.
Thank you.
So FGC is quite prevalent in Sierra Leone, as I mentioned. A peculiarity here is that it's part of an initiation ceremony called Bondo, where women are basically sworn into a secret society, or a young girl, actually. And this marks their transition into womanhood. What they do for a month in the bush is basically being trained on how to be a good wife, how to be a good mother, and then at the end there is this cutting ceremony. Now, when we asked about consequences of FGC to these female respondents, basically half of them thought that there was no health consequence whatsoever. And only 20% realized that there could actually be even a risk of death, either for the mother or for the child. So there seems to be scope for an information campaign. And what we did was we worked in 3 districts in Sierra Leone in a sample of 150 villages. And we equally split this sample, randomly assigning them to two treatment conditions and 1 control condition. The first treatment was this information campaign about the harmful consequences of FGC. The second is this alternative ritual that is called Bondo without cutting, and which essentially consists in community meetings to reframe this initiation ritual. I will say more both about the information campaign and about the Bondo without cutting. And then there's a control group. So the final sample includes 3,500 mothers and about 5,100 girls aged 7 to 15. Now, the general structure of these treatments is that we work with this local implementing partner called Amazonian Initiative Movement, and we planned a series of 5 community meetings over 4 months, lasting about 4 hours each. And in these meetings, the whole community would be involved. So this means village chiefs, traditional circumcisers, who are called Sowis in Sierra Leone, women leaders, religious leaders, teachers, community health workers. So we would start with this meeting with about 50 participants per village. And then the first meeting, which was common to both the first and second treatment, was basically alerting people to the issue. So a kind of a standard public education and sensitization. And then the subsequent meetings varied. So in the information treatment, we discussed several outcomes along which cut and uncut girls might differ. And we basically took information from the demographic and health surveys from Sierra Leone to study, to show descriptive statistics about health, education, marriage outcomes, and income. So here you see one example, like what is the probability that a woman has a child who died. And you see that this probability among the women who were circumcised is basically 34%, which we represented at among 50 circumcised women, at least 17 had a child who died. And then among the non-circumcised women, this probability is 8%. So in the graph, it gets represented with 4 women out of 50. So the idea was to give a very easy visual representation, reporting data from the DHS. In the bond without cutting treatment, the sensitization meeting was instead followed with leadership training and focus groups that were held with different groups of stakeholders. So one was, for example, with the cutters and with the Bondo members, and it was done in the bush. So, you know, just as a signal that this was not trying to move away from the tradition, but stay with the tradition. And then there was this groundwork done separately with the Sowis, with the women, the men, to understand and discuss the possibility of taking out the cutting element from the ritual, and to discuss what could be a new generation of signs or symbols that each group could adopt in substitution to the cutting. And finally, there was this capacity building workshop at the end with Sowis and parents.
Eliana, may I just ask a quick question about treatment 1? If you could just go back on the slides. So how much do we know? How much do you know about the trust that people have in government and statistics and the numbers, right? Obviously, your intervention relies on people believing the numbers that you give them. Do you have any indication of how much they might distrust that because it conflicts with the worldview, or anything about that?
No. Meaning we didn't elicit any, opinion or attitude or belief on this. This was not reported as government statistics. We mentioned the source, but I'm not sure, what they thought. The people leading the meeting were members of these organizations. So somehow I think it might have, trust might depend on the approach that these people, how these people were seen. They were Sierra Leoneans, they were, women, and I'm not sure I have a way to gauge the extent to which they believed it. You will see that the intervention had an effect. So, if they totally discounted the information, we wouldn't expect to see anything, but I don't have a way to quantify it. Thank you.
Great. There's a quick question in the chat, maybe that you want to address.
Okay,
right
sorry.
well.
Can I rely on?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to read it out to you. Yes, of course. I'll read it out to you. So Sarah asks, are there economic consequences for the SOAs? Is this the main income source?
Yes. So this is a very good question. So we didn't do a survey of the SOAs in Sierra Leone. We did it in Somalia, where the other project is. For about 50% of the SOAs, of the cutters there, it was the main income source. I expect that it would be the same here, at least. Now notice, however, that because the SOAs take the girls for a month, even with the new ritual, basically they get paid, okay? And so what we're doing with T2 in particular is not depriving the SOAs of their role, because they are still going to be the leaders of this bondo without cutting ceremony, and that's why they are getting trained. We're just taking their surgical functions away. And I don't think we have data on prices paid here. But for example, in Somalia, something that was surprising to us, that the price paid for infibulation and for clitoridectomy, which are drastically different in terms of complexity, was actually the same. So it seems that what families are paying is really kind of the ritual and the mark that this ritual leaves on the girl, but not so much the specifics of the function. So in this case, I'm not super worried that there might have been negative consequences on the SOAs. Of course, in the long run, if it disappears, there may be. Okay, thank you, Lou. Okay, so here you see one of these meetings in the Bondo Bush. And when I told you that communities were supposed to come up with the alternatives and, the types of alternative that you saw here, that you see here, are what they reported on the left. The most commonly chosen was just a public celebration of sort, or a special dress, a native song, a tattoo, secret code. And why did they think this might work? Basically, the single most reported answer was the absence of physical pain. So maybe they're not aware of the health consequences, but everyone is aware of the physical pain. We collected 3 rounds of data in 2019, 2021. And the questionnaires were administered to mothers who had at least one daughter in the age range 7 to 15. Another very important aspect is that, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first piece of research where we are able to compare self-reported answers on cutting with actual observation. So we arranged for health checks to be freely provided to daughters under the presence of the mother. There was a strict protocol that was carefully reviewed by IRBs, local and international. And what we were doing there were basically measuring height, weight. We were checking for possibly dermatological problems. And as part of that, there was a quick visual inspection, not an in-depth gynecological visit, but the nurse who was doing the check was basically able to code whether the girl had been cut or not. Okay, so in every village we had 2 nurses working. One was doing the health checks and the other was doing the survey. And of course, participation was voluntary, and the mothers could always decide to take the survey but not bring the daughters to the health check. And one thing that was actually surprising to me is that when you compare the self-reported cutting status with the objective observed cutting status, the correlation is very close to 90%. And it's really independent of the treatment, okay? And this is a baseline, so maybe it's not so surprising because, we randomize, so treatment should play no role here. But if you look at end line, after people had been, somehow had received information that if there was a social desirability bias might have led them to underreport, we don't see any of that. So we still see an equally strong correlation that's largely independent of treatment status. So to us, this is actually, very important piece of evidence because it also helps us interpret many findings that so far have relied on self-reported data on cutting. Now, what do we find? So this is the first piece of evidence, not very uplifting. If you look at cutting rates, this is at end line, so 2 years after the intervention, you basically see zero effect. Okay, so neither the information nor the bundle without cutting had an impact on cutting rates. Now, what happened when I told you about the dates of our surveys, both the midline and the end line ended up being affected by COVID. COVID, in Sierra Leone, there was actually it was illegal to have social gatherings during COVID. And because Bondo in this setting is a group activity, people basically stopped doing it, okay? So 92% of our sample says that there was less cutting due to COVID. And when asked why, it was either because of this prohibition or also because people said due to the negative economic effects, they didn't have money to pay for it. So this means that, we don't see much effect, but that's also because no cutting is going on. So one thing to possibly get at the, if you wish, both a counterfactual and a more long-term impact is to think, well, they haven't done it yet, but are they gonna do good? Are they going to do it when they get a chance? So we asked mothers about their future plans for daughters that were not yet cut, okay? And so these could be daughters who haven't reached cutting age or who are of cutting age but haven't been cut because of COVID. And so we can create a dependent variable which is a dummy for whether the daughter is currently uncut, but also plans to remain uncut as the mother reports, okay? So here the idea is, do we see someone who's not cut and, if these reported intentions are maintained, will not be cut in the future. And in the first two columns, the cut is reported and the intention is reported. In the third and fourth column, the cut is observed and the intention is, of course, still reported. So you see that in these cases, we're seeing a marginally significant positive effect on the intentions not to cut one's daughter. And this is very similar both when we look at T1 and when we look at T2, okay? So in terms of magnitude, they're very comparable. It's a large effect because you see in the control group, only 1 out of 3 girls is uncut and planned not to be cut in the future. And this goes up by, about 8 to 10 percentage points, representing 38 to 30% of the mean in control. Okay, so of course you could say, look, these intentions not to cut, we may believe them up to a point due to potential reporting bias. We have a couple more outcomes to try to address that. One is to have a list experiment where basically people weren't asked to just say, I will not cut, but were given a list of statements and in a subset of the interviews, the list contained 4 statements. In another, it contained 5. And the 5th was the statement, I would prefer my daughter not to be cut. So this is kind of the sensitive item. And by comparing the average number of statements that respondents report as being true in one or the other condition, we are able to understand what is the prevalence of this sensitive item. And so in this case, we see that it's actually, again, quite comforting because the number is very similar in the control group to the self-reported one that we had in the previous table. So it's the mean in control group is 0.31, and this is what Cher says that they would want their daughter not to be cut. When we look at the treatment, this number goes up by about 8 percentage points. Again, pretty much the same point estimate that we had with the other variable. So it was, let me repeat it, you know, this is kind of a not an easy topic to talk about. And I was absolutely surprised to see that on many dimensions, the self-reported and the, you know, less prone to bias measures were really the same in terms of point estimates. So that's comforting. And then in the last 2 columns, you see the result of a donation experiment where people were asked whether were given some money from us and said, you can use this money to donate it either to an NGO fighting female genital cutting or to an NGO fighting climate change. And again, it's here, we don't have precise results. Qualitatively, it seems as if the bond without cutting might have, you know, increased the share of people donating to the NGO fighting FGC. And the last thing we do in the paper is to look at who benefited the most. So some heterogeneity analysis using machine learning. And we find that both treatments have stronger effects on women who are less educated, who are older and therefore have older daughters, who have bigger families, and who are less likely to say that Bondo is widely practiced in the community. However, we get opposite results for T1 and T2 when we look at items like awareness that a child can die or being yourself more in favor. So we're trying to understand more why this heterogeneity goes in different directions for these particular 2 variables. And then there's some interesting complementarity. And this is the last table I will show you for this one experiment, where if you look at this outcome of the daughters is uncut and is planned to remain uncut, and you not only include treatment dummies on the among the controls, but also an interaction with whether the respondent at baseline knew about the negative health consequences of FGC. You see that basically the effect of T1 is there regardless of whether the respondent is knowledgeable from the start or not. Okay, so you can see that this positive effect on the likelihood that the girl is reported as won't be cut is there for everybody. But the effect of Bondo without cutting is not there for the people who don't know the health consequences, and instead it's there for those who knew the health consequences at baseline. So this suggests that because the second treatment didn't have a lot of action in terms of information and discussion of these consequences, but only the initial sensitization session, this might not have been enough to persuade women who weren't already aware about the necessity of getting rid of the cutting. So there's this interesting complementarity where if you want to have this, you know, alternative ritual or replace a norm with a less harmful norm, in the absence of some awareness or some complementary information, this might actually not work. Okay, so this is a summary of what I just said. And then in the remaining 15 minutes, I'd like to talk about the other experiment that we did.
Eliana, could I quickly interrupt you with a question from the chat? We have a question from Michelle Gelfin. Do you have any evidence that males in the community have positive attitudes about the new Bondo ceremony without cutting?
We don't, because in this particular project, we only interviewed women. We are in the field right now for a fourth round. And I'm not sure, but this is a good, well, we are tracking the same respondents, but we could have added maybe some focus groups with men. Maybe we're still on time to do something. I don't know.
Eliana, may I ask something? This decision made by women, and the men defer to the women.
Yes, here it is. Okay, I mean, they report it is. So in that sense, we felt okay going with the women. It might still be valuable to understand, if there are maybe discussions at home, it might still be valuable to understand the attitudes of men. In Somalia, we actually had equal representation of men and women in the groups with which we worked, and we didn't find any substantially different opinions. So certainly it wasn't the men pushing this on women in Somalia. I don't know for Sierra Leone. I expect it would be mostly a woman's decision, especially because men have their own secret societies. And this is actually seen also almost as a kind of not an emancipation tool, but we've heard discussions of women saying, well, if they have their secret society, why shouldn't we have our Bondo? Okay, so somehow it is protected as a woman's realm, if we wish. But so thank you, Christina. This maybe, we didn't think about working with men in this context, but it could be still useful in general to have their opinion. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me tell you what we did instead in Somalia. And this is work with Selim Guleshi, David Smerdon, and Moshe Sulaiman. So here, it's the prevalence, if possible, is even higher than in Sierra Leone. And it's not a community ritual. It's instead done, privately. But what is typical, and for us extremely, interesting, also research-wise, is that while we tend to talk about FGC in general, in Somalia, there are different types and different words used for different practices. So there's a pharaonic circumcision, which is basically infibulation, and it's extremely harmful. And there's something called Sunnah, which it's actually Sunnah Kaber and Sunnah Saker. It's two different types, clitoridectomy and excision, but we pool them under one category here. And this is clearly less harmful. And we asked people, why they follow one or the other. And it was interesting to us that pharaonic cut is reported as more, this is our culture, while Sunnah is more reported as, being a good Muslim requires doing Sunnah. And what we've done here is we started with a pilot where we tried to understand beliefs and support for the practice. And we quickly realized that there was a near universal support for Sunnah. So in that, on that front, there was no scope for correcting misperceptions. But people were overestimating community support for pharaonic. So we thought here there could be room for a pluralistic ignorance type of intervention. And what we did was we organized group meetings where there was first a component common to every community in the sample where we worked, which was gathering participants in groups of about 30 people, and we had two separate meetings, one for men and the other for women. During the meetings, these participants would vote anonymously on whether they favored abolishing pharaonic circumcisions or not. So we literally gave them some voting cards that had nothing, no names, no identifier on it, just a yes or no, okay? And then we also incentivized them to guess how many members in that meeting would vote in favor of abolishing pharaonic. So this is going to give us a reliable estimate of their prior beliefs. It was incentivized in the sense that who got closer to the actual fraction would be given some phone credit. And in this incentivization, we know who the person is, okay? So we don't know their own, how they stand, but we know what is their belief about other people's support. And then, depending on the treatment that you got, we would have different structure for the meetings. If your community was a control community, things would stop here, okay? So we collect the anonymous vote, we collect the prior beliefs, and then we leave. If you were in a T1 community, we open the ballots on site right then, and we announce the results of the poll. So we say, you see, we are 29 and 25 people said that they favor abandoning. Okay, so we basically announced the share in support. And in a second group of community, we don't open the ballot, but after the poll, we say, we're gonna draw a circle on the ground, okay? And if you are in favor of abandoning FGC, you should come and step into the circle. So basically people were invited to, take this public action. As I said, it's kind of an experimental equivalent of the public declaration. And we saw that the median share of people who step into the circle was 90%. So we didn't record who was going in the circle. So we don't have the identity, but we reported how many people in each meeting, okay? And then there was a third treatment where we did both. We did the poll, the poll was followed by the announcement, and after hearing the share of people in support, people could choose whether to step into the circle or not, okay? So T1 is trying to address the pluralistic ignorance channel, T2 is trying to address coordination failure, and T3 would do both. Also here we had 3 rounds of data collection. Again, the same years, these 2 projects were launched in parallel, and so the timing is very similar. The sample was 4,000 individuals, about half of them men and half women, and we got information about their daughters. In this setting, we couldn't do the health checkups. So what I'm gonna use is self-reported information, but again, it's basically ubiquitous, so people are not afraid or shy in saying that their daughters are cut. So first of all, let me show you the distribution of the true support for abandoning pharaonic circumcision, which is the dashed green curve, and the guess, so the prior that people have, okay? And you see how, there is clearly a majority in favor of abandoning pharaonic, but people underestimate that. So the distribution is of the prior beliefs is clearly to the left. Also, when you look at coordination, here you see what is the share stepping into the circle, which is the green line. And here is the orange curve is still, your prior about how many would support abandoning. And so what's interesting is that you see more people stepping into the circle than those who think that the other are, than the share of expected support in terms of prior beliefs. So there is, again, also potentially room for this coordination role. And last descriptive graph I'm going to show you is what if we compare the share who voted anonymously that they wanted to abandon FGC with the share who stepped into the circle, signaling that they wanted to abandon, okay? If everybody did exactly what they wrote on the ballot, the points should be on the 45-degree line, okay? And what we're seeing here is that the majority of the points are above, so there is more action in terms of stepping into the circle than people's own anonymously revealed preference. But there's also a non-negligible number of communities where, even though people, a high share of respondents were privately in favor of abandoning FGC, they ended up not stepping into the circle as much, okay? And we would be very interested in understanding more. We did minimal observations there, so we don't know if this was kind of maybe meetings captured by leaders or what, but it's interesting, and yeah, we're trying to work more on this. So let me show you the results quickly. First of all, I told you in this case, there's no such thing as just cutting. We have pharaonic, we have SUNA, and we have uncut. And the pattern you're going to see is that, by and large, the coordination per se, and even the coordination plus announcement, don't show robust results. The announcement only, so the pluralistic ignorance treatment, shows up as a more stronger determinant of behavior. How does behavior change? Well, the share of girls who are cut with pharaonic, which is actually low because the country has largely transitioned to SUNA, but it's like 4.3% in the control group, goes down by 1.6 percentage points. So this is a large reduction, given how much action there was to decrease it in the first place. What's happening that's not maybe so great is that SUNA rates are actually going up and uncut rates are going down, okay? And we have and you could see this in various ways. One could be like, once you announce that people are not so favorable to pharaonic, this might actually be interpreted as people are favorable to SUNA or people are favorable to uncut. So there is an ambiguity, so this increase in SUNA might be the result of that ambiguity. Another interpretation is if you think of a model of norms where, instead of having a binary choice, cut or not cut, you have three possible actions: not cut, cut in a mild form, and cut in a very harmful form. Actually, this model can show that the transition would imply first going to the mild form, and then either getting stuck there or eventually transitioning to the uncut, okay? So this is a theoretical paper that we have with the same co-author plus Sam Jindani and Peyton Young, and we have a model there that shows this and then uses our Somalia data to simulate transitions. But this pattern experimentally is also very close to what the model actually predicts. Now, also here, we've done the same thing, which is not just stop at the current cuts, but look at future plans. So now you have three types of variables. One is the girl is pharaonic cut, or she's currently uncut, but the parents say that she will be cut pharaonic. Second is the girl is SUNA cut, or she is planned to be SUNA cut. And the last is she's uncut and planned not to be cut, okay? And when you take this longer term horizon, now unambiguously T1 and borderly T3 seem to increase the share of girls who will remain uncut in the future, okay? So it's, look at the mean, it's pretty low, okay? So we're not changing society here. In the control group, you only have 3.6% of the girls who are reported as they will remain uncut, and this share is basically doubled by our intervention. Right. So let me just tell you the list experiment gives you very similar results to what we had before. So the decrease in pharaonic cut is also coming out of this list experiment, which is less subject to reporting bias. And there's one thing I'd like, I know I'm over time, but I'd love to show you this because it's something that I haven't seen in other research, and we thought it was interesting to collect this data. So we tried to get a sense, and please let me know if I should have seen it and where I can find it, because we wanted to get a sense of how much conformity there was. And so we asked the question, suppose that, say 40 individuals out of 100 in this community decided to circumcise their daughters. Would you circumcise your daughter or not? Okay, so we started from 100 and then we worked down to 80, 60, 40, 20, and so on. And here you see a graph of the answers that people gave, okay, where 100 is when we say, suppose that 100% circumcises, you see that about 80% of the people tell you that they would do the same. Then if you decrease this number, the share who respond, yes, I would do the same, goes down. But, there's a large fraction of people who tells you that they would circumcise even if nobody did it, okay? And this is mostly because of these kind of religious component that people attach to it. And what's interesting is that when you compare the control group, which is the dotted line, and then the coordination or the double treatment, this doesn't seem to have changed over time in those treatments. But in treatment one, the slope is the same, but the intercept goes down. So overall, we have reduced also the degree to which people conform to what others are doing in making this choice, okay? If you instead combine information on what happens when you step into the circle and when you don't, something else comes up, which is interesting, that is, in places where the share of people stepping into the circle is above the mean, then the slope is similar to the control group. But in places where actually not many people decided to take that action, it looks as if the exercise has even increased the extent of conformity, because now individual choices become more reactive to what the other are hypothetically doing, okay? So we think this is interesting. It wasn't the main focus of the research. It was one of the things we wanted to explore. But again, I'd love to have more insights or suggestions on this. And from the Somalia exercise, we take that pluralistic ignorance is playing a role in explaining the worst form of FGC, and that correcting beliefs can help there. Coordination was less effective. It could be that our coordination exercise was too basic to work. Maybe you need a lot more preparation and more complexity in how this is engineered. And also, we think Somalia is a very important example of how in settings where you have norms that can have intermediate forms, this might actually quite change the dynamics of the transition, which you saw when you saw the increase in SUNA rates in the short run. So I'm done. Thank you, and sorry for going a bit over time.
Eliana, thanks so much. This was fantastic. Do you mind maybe leaving up your slides? Because
sure.
I'm sure some people might just have questions.
Yes.
Those who have questions, feel free to raise your hand. I see a question by Sarah. Let me maybe start with something that you just presented. If you could go back on like slide 35 or 34. So could you clarify, are these solicitations at within subject design? So I, as a participant, I see essentially it's like a strategy method elicitation. I see different percentages, and then you sort of inquire with me what my likelihood is.
You don't see them all at once, okay? it's an enumerator asking you and saying, look, suppose in 100 out of 100, so everybody in the community cuts. Would you do it or not? Yes. Now, suppose instead it's only 80 out of 100. Would you do it or not? Yes, and so on.
Sure.
And
Okay.
we
So
stop when people say, no, I wouldn't do it. At that point, we take it as a zero.
Great. Yeah, so it is a within subject design in the sense that you elicit this response at the individual level for all the levels, right? It's not that you randomly, yes, great. Because what I find surprising, and maybe you have ways to looking at that, more in your data, there must be some underlying heterogeneity that explains that although people are somewhat sensitive, right? It's an upward slope. They're somewhat sensitive. I'm still surprised that actually, by and large, they are fairly non-sensitive to the share of the sort of the other people, because if you go down to zero, it's still about 50% where people say, I don't really care at all that others are doing. And also, if you go all the way to 100%, you still don't get everybody to jump on that. So there must be some heterogeneity that could be captured, like who are the people who are maybe completely non-sensitive to this messaging, and who are the people who are perfectly aligned with that messaging, right? And so that might give you a little bit more intuition as to what's actually going on.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll do. And by the way, we have the same graph also for Sierra Leone, because we implemented the same elicitation in Sierra Leone. And again, even there, I forget exactly the intercept, but you always get to the point where there's some people who do it regardless, and that there are some people who will not do it regardless. And I expect that if you think about that simple utility function I gave you, but it would be nice to, study who are these people.
I mean, especially from a policy point of view, right? If you want to find ways to target, you want to be able to identify those. And it seems to me that you're capturing at least multiple types, at least two types of people. Some of them, they're just like, I just do it regardless, and others are completely followers, right? And I feel like you being able to identify will actually help you with the next steps. Right?
Absolutely, yes. Thanks.
Great.
I
so
have
then,
a question.
Christina, go ahead.
Sorry. I have a question about exactly this slide. Now, it looks, there is a certain difference between T1 and the others, the poll plus announcement, okay?
Yeah.
So in the condition in which you do the poll and then you announce the result to everybody, then you ask the supposed question, correct?
So, sorry, when
do you ask the supposed question?
The supposed question is asked everywhere, and it's asked at end line, so either 1 or 2 years later. But this, the announcement is done when we do the intervention. Maybe I didn't get your question, Christina.
No, I know that. But I'm interested about the gap between the people who have been exposed to T1.
Yes.
Versus, for example, the T3 or the T2. I think.
Okay.
And it looks as if the people who have exposed to T1, they seem to think, well, I know, okay, how many voted to abolish.
Yes.
Okay, and this is really a focal point. I know that. And so when you ask me to suppose, my reaction, certainly, the tendency to go down, obviously, but is in a sense more muted than the reactions of people who have been exposed to the coordination, for example, where there is a 60%, they go down, really. And so I'm trying to understand why there is this gap, and if it is statistically significant, and it seems to me to be a little significant.
Okay, no, it is significant. And thank you. I think your interpretation makes sense. There's two things to observe, and it's actually important, the language here, okay? Our experiment and the prior we elicited and announced was about pharaonic circumcision, okay? So whatever we announced in most cases was basically that people were not in favor, or if a small fraction was in favor. This question, suppose, uses the word in local language, circumcised, but in a broad sense that includes SUNA, okay? So, and everybody is in favor of SUNA. So there could still be some type of inference that if fewer people were in favor of pharaonic, maybe I anchor to that as, but we don't think that this is actually a different question because it's about cutting your daughter with SUNA in practice, okay? In fact, you see a high fraction who say I would do it. It's because people do SUNA and would do that regardless. So your interpretation might require some extrapolation, no? What I learned about pharaonic, what does it tell me about SUNA? So we could look at actually, because beliefs about support for SUNA, I think is one of the outcomes we can look at. So we can maybe test if there is that extrapolation.
You should, because again, pharaonic is really terrible.
Yes, yes.
While SUNA can be done, you know, if you're modern, you go to a gynecologist. And do SUNA. So it's in a sense much less damaging. I have another question. There is this strange result in which more people step into the circle than privately support abandonment.
Yes.
How do you explain that? You know, there is clearly a public thing. Stepping into circle, everybody sees me. And privately supporting is my private thing. So there may be some sort of social influence effect here.
Yes, so that's what we think, in the sense that, you know, we think there is some type of social pressure where even if I don't support abandonment, you know, I see many people joining and I decide I have to join too. Although I think this would predict, and it is, you see the number of points above is quite highly concentrated on high shares, okay? So these are community where the private support was high. There's almost no, you know, no points here because it was pharaonic, so nobody had that high support. But there are also some of these points around 40, 50, 60% where you see points above more than below, okay? So, but I do think, you know, kind of quality, if you eyeball these points, it seems to be this type of social pressure mechanism. What I cannot honestly much explain are people in the you know, this in the range of 80% and above, these few points where the thing completely unraveled. But again, it might be captured by some religious leader who happened to be in the room and we don't know it. But so would you say that this kind of social pressure explanation is enough, or there's something that you don't think is
social pressure is generally important. And, you know, it depends how you analyze, you know, the norm. Is it just a descriptive norm? I want to do like other people do, basically, you know, imitation, coordination, whatever, or there is a more, a stronger, let's say, normative component that I fear some social consequences, negative social consequences coming from other people if I don't do that. And it's not clear from your analysis which is which.
Okay, so I can say something to that, because in our pilot, when we were trying to understand what type of intervention to do, we also wanted to measure sanctions and social consequences as we could. And we put in a lot of questions like vignettes, you know, if the family of this girl decides not to cut, would they be able to access credit from other families if they need it? So we thought there would be these economic consequences and so on. And nothing came out of that. Again, it was pilot results. So eventually those questions didn't make it into the survey. Our understanding was that, you know, if there was shunning or stuff like that, yeah, maybe we didn't ask the right way. I need to double check if we kept something on sanctions.
Yeah, yeah, double check, because sometimes another question to ask is, if there is a family that you know doesn't do that, how do you feel about that?
Yes. And in fact, that was one of, we said, do you know that it fell apart because we said we wanted to ask, do you know of girls who haven't been cut? What happened to that family? And that was a filter. And do you know girls who haven't been cut? No. Okay. So this is 98% prevalence. Nobody knew of someone who hadn't done it. And so we couldn't get good measures of these sanctions. But you're right. Let me see if we have anything to get at that. But
and a last point, you have, different when you were explaining the reason. And we're saying the fourth point, facilitate collective coordination, and the work done by Tostan and company when they have public declaration, etc., etc. And certainly, if there is this important social component, this is very interesting. If it is a descriptive norm, just information about what other people do, etc., etc. The problem here, you are in a situation in Somalia where 98% do that. So you cannot inform on a lie. So the question is, in a situation where a large majority does it, how do you manage to coordinate on something different?
so
Yes.
what?
Sorry. Yeah.
So let me. I don't know if I can. Let me tell you something. The reason we did the intervention on pharaonic was because it was the only case where we thought we could, coordinate away from it for the few who were still doing it. And where we thought that maybe this would spill over to less SUNA as well. Okay, it was a possibility, but with SUNA, you are right, there's not so much scope for doing that, because if we cannot tell a lie, any type of information is going to be that other people are doing it. I have a graph in the theory paper that shows you the transition. We have cohort information on the type of cut you got, and it's quite a striking graph. You start with always everybody is cut. You start for the cohorts who were cut from 1960 until, let's say, the mid-90s. It was almost universally pharaonic and no SUNA. In the mid-90s, you see these things start to change, they cross, and nowadays it's SUNA and very little pharaonic. So it's a fascinating, I think, transition where the country moved from universal pharaonic to almost universal SUNA. And these were years where, because of international human rights campaigns and so on, the imams decided to distance themselves from pharaonic and to start endorsing SUNA.
I have another question for you. SUNA is seen as a religious duty, basically. And I don't know what's happening in Sudan now, but you remember that there's been this apparently initially successful Salima campaign. You know that?
That's the one that's the Efferson and others.
No, it took place much before them. Basically, they enlisted imams, Muslim religious leaders, that explained to people that the Quran, there is nothing in the Quran that supports female genital cutting. And instead, it's very interesting, they use this word, Salima, that was at the center of the campaign, that means uncut, pure, completely full body, etc., etc. And apparently it had a large success. Now, I do not know if, it has been sustainable. But one thing that I know is that intelligently, what they focused on was religion. As in Somalia, Sunnah is supported by religion, and so it may be just a religious leader that explain to people, no, sorry, this is not in the Quran, and you may not
Yes.
do.
So I know that there was a discussion, because I think the Somali imams are a lot more favorable to Sunnah. It's also possibly part of their sphere of authority that they might not want to lose. So some of the interventions we were working with Save the Children on, discussing potential interventions. I think they wanted to get imams from other countries to come and discuss and so on. But I'm not aware of anything that's been done there. I will, thank you. I will look at this Salima campaign.
I'm very sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
Christina, but we are actually 8 minutes over time, so we have to draw this talk to a close. I want to thank Eliana so much for her presentation. I want to thank Sophia Pink for her talk. Check them both out, and we do have another excellent speaker next month. We're going to have Catherine DeVries on December 8th talk about geographies of discontent, how public service deprivation increased far-right support in Italy. It will no doubt be a good one. But thank you, everybody. We'll see you again next month. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much.